Well, I'm down here in Lower Reach Park in beautiful Smiths Falls, Ontario, Canada. The wind is wild. I'll put the window down here. Yeah, it's a wild wind. Um, yeah. Anyway, there's I'm about to make a comparison that I don't really like to make because it's been made too often lately, and in many cases, it's made in such a way that it really is an off-the-wall comparison. But I'm going to make it just because I've been thinking about this lately, and I do know a bit about history. And especially for whatever reason, I don't know why, but early to mid 20th century history always fascinates me. That era, of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I find that to be a very interesting era. I think that era was, in many ways, there were a lot of major turning points in human history during that era. And I just find it to be a really interesting era when you look at the progress that was made, when you look at how hard life was for that era, but at the same time, there were so many things that did change for the better. So it was a very optimistic era. And even with all the awful things that happened, and I just find it to be an interesting era. Plus, I find the technology of the era interesting. The analog technology, which I grew up with myself. It really wasn't until the 2000s that we started to see a lot of digital technology. But anyway, so I was already an adult when that happened in my 30s. But here's the thing. I say for me, I like the old 40s and 50s cars and so on, and I used to like to tinker with old television sets and radios and things like that, vacuum tube stuff. So I find that era quite interesting, and I find it interesting just how things worked politically, how things worked in terms of just how mechanical things worked, how electrical things worked, and so on. I've always found that very interesting. And the advances that were made socially and scientifically and in all different fields, on top of all the nasty stuff that happened, the Holocaust and all the famines that happened in communist countries and so on. And those things are tied into what I'm about to say. Our leader, our new prime minister, who I believe was appointed, not elected, but anyway, that's just my belief. I may be wrong. I acknowledge I may be wrong, but that's my belief. My personal belief. You can disagree with me. There's no law that says you can't. So go ahead and disagree with me. If you disagree with me, that's perfectly acceptable. I'll just agree to disagree with you. That's all on that point. That's the only thing. But what I've noticed, though, is in early 20th century history, there were a few leaders that we know about. One of them was Adolf Hitler. Mao Tse-tung was another one in China, and Joseph Stalin in Russia. They all come to mind. And every one of them said they wanted to make the world a better place. They wanted to create a utopian paradise for their people. That's what they said. That's what they wanted to do. And then they proceeded to manufacture a hellscape of epic proportions and to justify it by saying this is necessary so that we can have the utopia we want in the future. Well, not long ago, I heard Mark Carney talking, and he was being interviewed, and he said the same thing. He said, look, I'm going to make life harder for Canadians. It's going to get a lot more difficult. But he said it's necessary, and he said people are going to hurt. But it's necessary because at the other end of it is this great world that we're going to build out of doing that. You know, we're going to build a world with a clean environment and with social justice and you know, and all the rest of it. And we're going to do it by making the people's lives harder over the long term, by basically unleashing hell on earth over the long term, over the short term at least, over the next few years or even decades. Now, let's just look at that for a minute, and let's look at the history. See, this is the thing. I like history, and I don't shy away from even the dirty, negative parts of it. It's like when I was doing a job, when I worked for the auctioneer, I was the guy that would get in there and deal with stuff that the others didn't want to deal with. You know, and I remember my boss one time saying that he loved an employee that would just do the job and that would deal with shit that nobody else wanted to deal with. So I was the guy when there was some dirty, filthy mess to be dealt with. And sometimes there was. You'd be amazed at some of the crap we pulled out of houses. Some of it could even be considered biohazardous. I was the guy that ended up handling that stuff because the others wouldn't. You know, I was the guy that ended up disposing of it because others wouldn't. And so maybe that makes me a fool. But still, I was the guy that would handle all the crap that the others wouldn't handle. And so I was known for that, you know, that I would just do the job. I didn't care if it needed to be. Somebody had to do it, you know. If not me, somebody else. There's nobody else stepping up to do it, so I would end up doing it. And that's how I always was when it come to employment and so on. You know, I would do what needed to be done. Whether I enjoyed it or not was a different matter. I didn't come to work expecting to enjoy every aspect of my job, you know. But here's the thing. What I've noticed is, so for me, what I've noticed is through history, there's a lot of dirty, nasty stuff. I mean, history is not clean. History has a lot of nastiness in it. And I don't shy away from that. I'll read about the horrors of the Holocaust, and I'll read about the various famines that took place in China and Russia and everything, and I'll learn about them. And to me, there's value in that, because if you learn from it, then maybe you can help your own society not to repeat it, should the situation arise. You can see it in my glasses. You can see the you can see the river there, the Rideau River, in my glasses. Anyway, bottom line is this. I'll just lay it on the line. All of these leaders that I know of that claimed they were going to build a utopian paradise on the backs of the current population, they were basically going to break the backs of the current population, and they were going to pretty much destroy the generation that existed at that time for the good of future generations. It never worked out that way. Yes, they did destroy the current generation, but they did not create the utopian paradise that they talked about. What they did is they created a massive hellscape, and at the end of it, there was still a massive hellscape and a big mess to be cleaned up. You know, at the end of the Holocaust, what did we have? We didn't have a utopian paradise. We had a friggin' nightmare, you know. The same is true. I mean, I've seen the videos. I've seen the films of the soldiers. I remember one time it actually made me tear up a bit. There was a soldier working in one of these camps. He was one of the Allied soldiers, and they had liberated the camp. And he was running a bulldozer, and he was pushing the corpses of the victims of that atrocity into a trench to bury them. And the man was wearing a mask over his face because, of course, you're dealing with rotting bodies, you know, and stuff. And a lot of these people were diseased, too. No, a mask really doesn't do much to protect you, but still, that's what he was doing. And I suppose he was stirring up a lot of dust, too, so I suppose it kept some of the dust out of his system. But the other thing was, what I noticed about that man, because they kind of went in on his face, you know, and I could see the tears running down the side of his face from his eyes. And my heart went out to him. You know, and I mean, for the rest of his life, he would have that as a memory. You know, I had to run a bulldozer and plow all these bodies into a grave. You know, no, it had to be done. Somebody had to do it. It was him that did it, either because he volunteered to do it, because he felt like he was strong enough that he could handle it, or because he was just told to do it and he had to, because, you know, you're in the army, you do as you're told. There's a chain of command and it must be followed. You know, you must obey your superior officer. If he says get on that bulldozer and get those bodies into a grave, you do it, you know. But, and it did need to be done. It was a necessary thing because those bodies posed a hazard to the living at that point. You know, nothing more could be done for those people. Those people were beyond our help, you see. But I saw the tears running down that man's face. That was the result of the Holocaust. It was not a utopian paradise. There was no utopian paradise created there. There was just friggin' horror. That's what there was. In the 1920s, Stalin created through the policies he established, he created a famine in Russia. People starved to death. It was pretty bad. And I've looked into all that history too. Stalin was a horrible person. Absolutely horrible person. And he hurt the people of Russia so badly. But he did it under the guise of creating a utopian workers' paradise. It's going to be great, guys. We got to get through this rough time. Then it's going to be great. If you survive this, you're going to be glad because it's going to be great. You know what? Nobody was glad. It was horrible. And good didn't come out of it. All that came out of it was more bad and different kinds of bad until it finally just collapsed under its own weight because it was just it was a monstrosity is what it was, and it had to come down. And anyway, but that was all done like that. I saw a picture of a roadside stand, you know, where like it looked like a stand where you might buy strawberries or something, you know, or blueberries or whatever along the highway. Guess what the people were selling? They were selling meat from their children whom they had murdered. Because the famine was so bad, people were eating children. And these people had murdered their children, and they were feasting on their children, and they were putting the parts of their children up for sale in a roadside stand. So, you know, people were buying meat from children. Now, if that isn't hell on earth, I don't know what is. Same with the stories I've heard of the Holocaust. Mao Zedong in China did the same thing. He created a famine too. And similar things happened in China, terrible atrocities. People suffered. And this was all under the guise of we're going to have a utopian paradise. It's going to be great. We got to get through a rough patch first, though, but then it's going to be great. You be glad we did this. No, you won't be. You know, nobody was. I mean, you know, like if you survived it, all you came away from the other end of it with was trauma. Sounds like some hail is starting now. Or maybe just heavy rain, I don't know. Anyway, if you survived it, well, then all you got on the other end of it was trauma. That's all. A lot of traumatized people. A lot of people screwed up for life. But those were the lucky ones because they still had a life, you know. A lot of people lost their lives in those situations. So whenever I hear a political leader saying, you know, basically, I'm going to make your life a living hell in the short term, but it'll be worth it because we're going to build something great out of that. Scares me badly, to be honest. It really does. It just frightens me. You know, again, if you know history, it will. How can it not? When you see a picture of a booth where they're actually selling meat from children, or you see a soldier, an Allied soldier, operating a bulldozer, plowing the bodies of the dead victims into a mass grave, and the tears streaming down his face, you know, how can you know this stuff and not have that make you nervous? You know, really. Anyway, Carney's definitely a World Economic Forum man. He's definitely a globalist. No good comes of globalism. He was appointed to the job. That's my opinion. I don't believe he was elected. I believe he was appointed. I believe they all are. And, you know, and if you look at it, look, of all the evils, I would say, the potential evils we had to choose from, I would say Pierre Poliver was the best, or at least the least bad. But even with him, he was a coward. He's a political coward. And he advocated for a lot of crazy things. He advocated for the promotion of wars in foreign countries and all kinds of stuff. You know, he wanted to give the police a lot more power and all that, which I don't believe they need. We need to enforce some laws that already exist, and we need to do it fairly. I mean, some guys out there committing atrocities, raping, robbing, and killing people, well, you know, we need to address that better than we have. That's for sure. But, you know, there's none of them that don't want to do stuff that would hurt a guy like me, really. I mean, Poliver talked about cracking down on the homeless people. Now, he did also say making life better for them, though, too. The thing is, though, it'll be better by whatever he decides is better, you know? Maybe his idea of better isn't the next guy's idea of better. Anyway, the bottom line is, none of them are much good. It's just that some of them are worse than others, and some of them aren't as bad as others. I would say Poliver isn't as bad as the others, but he's still no good. So, you know, a vote for him is just a vote for the lesser of evils, that's all. But at the same time, yeah, I don't think it even matters, because I think it was already decided long before the election. I think the election is just a formality, so to give us the illusion of having choice, that's all. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Whatever it is, it's done now. We got to get through it. It's not going to be easy. And look, he's promised us. Carney has promised us that it's not going to be easy. I think we should believe him, at least on that point. He's a dirty liar on most points, but let's believe him on that anyway. That's probably the one thing he's told us that is true, as he's going to make sure it won't be easy. He already knows that, and he's told us that. So we should take that to heart. We should believe it. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm going to get off here. I'm going to head back to Camp Crazy. I am Camp Crazy. Rocky's probably in the camper right now. The rain will have driven him in. The wind seems to have died down a bit. The rain is kind of sort of stopped. Oh, now the wind's picking up again. The friggin' trees, eh? Everything blowing around there. You can see there now, then. It's pretty scary. The truck was actually rocking with the wind. It was, you know, pretty wild. Anyway, I'm going to get moving. I am. Yeah, I'm going to get moving. I am. We'll see y'all later. We will. Bye-bye.